A police canine dog ultimate test to protect the son of his fallen partner. When intruders break into Owen's home, they have no idea they're stepping into the house of a fallen officer. As his mother faces a life-threatening attack, Owen hides, clutching his father's badge, praying for a miracle. Just when all hope seems lost, Titan, the once silent canine, awakens his instincts in a ferocious battle to protect his new family. With sirens closing in and danger at its peak, will Titan's bravery be enough to save them? Officer Logan Mitchell moved through the station, his partner at his side. Titan, a powerful Belgian Malinois, kept pace with him, ears alert, dark eyes scanning the room like he always did. They weren't just a team, they were family. On and off duty, they were never apart. Logan trusted Titan with his life, and Titan, in turn, would do anything to protect him. The call came in just before midnight. A drug bust in the heart of the city, one of the most dangerous raids they had faced yet. The team assembled quickly, checking weapons and gear as they prepared to move in. Titan's harness was strapped on tight, his breathing steady as Logan ran a hand through his fur. "You ready, boy?" Logan asked, though he already knew the answer. Titan's tail flicked once in response. He was always ready. The warehouse loomed ahead, its steel door shut tight. The air was thick with tension as the team took their positions. A battering ram forced the door open, and the unit poured inside. The stench of chemicals and stale sweat filled the space. Men scattered at the sight of armed officers, but a few weren't willing to go down without a fight. Gunfire erupted. Logan ducked behind a stack of crates, Titan at his side. The dog didn't flinch. He was trained for this. With a quick hand signal, Logan sent him forward. Titan lunged, taking down a suspect with precision. The man hit the ground hard, crying out as Titan held him in place. "Good boy," Logan breathed before moving deeper into the warehouse. A door burst open. A figure emerged from the shadows, raising a weapon. Logan didn't have time to react before a shot rang out. Pain tore through his chest. He staggered, his vision swimming, but he refused to fall. Not yet. Titan lunged, sinking his teeth into the gunman's arm. Another shot fired. This time, Titan yelped. The sound was sharp, filled with pain. But still, he didn't let go. He held on, his body pressed against Logan, as if trying to shield him from further harm. The chaos blurred around them. More officers swarmed in, taking control. The suspect was subdued, but Logan's knees buckled. He hit the ground hard, his breath shallow. Titan whined, pressing close, nudging at him. But Logan's strength was slipping away. The last thing he saw before the world faded was Titan's face, loyal, determined, refusing to leave him. The day of the funeral arrived with a sky heavy with clouds. The police force stood in full uniform, a sea of blue and black, their faces grim. Logan's coffin rested at the front, draped with the flag. Silence filled the air, thick with grief. Titan sat beside the casket, his body tense, his gaze locked on the wooden surface, as if waiting for Logan to call his name. Officers tried to coax him away, but he wouldn't move. When the final words were spoken, and the casket was lowered, a deep, aching howl rose from Titan's throat. It carried through the cemetery, raw and broken. No one spoke. No one moved. The sound gripped every heart present, leaving even the toughest officers with eyes burning from unshed tears. Days passed, but Titan remained at Logan's grave. He refused food, turning away from every bowl placed before him. Officers took turns trying to bring him back to the station, to give him a new home, but Titan wouldn't leave. He lay in the dirt, his head resting against the fresh soil. Rain came and went, soaking his fur, but he never moved. The world around him continued on, but for Titan, nothing mattered anymore. The one person he had ever truly belonged to was gone, and no amount of calling or coaxing could change that. Titan waited, day after day, as if Logan might return. But deep down, in the way only a dog could understand, he knew the truth. And still he stayed. Not far away, the station buzzed with voices and movement. But Titan remained still, his body tense as officers watched from a distance. The department had been trying for weeks to assign him a new handler, but every attempt ended the same way. Titan refused to follow orders, his once sharp obedience buried under grief. Officer Ramirez knelt a few feet away, hand extended. Come on, buddy. Let's try this again. Titan's ears flicked back, but he didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the ground. The officer took a cautious step forward, speaking gently, but before he could get any closer, Titan let out a low, warning growl. The message was clear: stay back. That's the third time this week, Sergeant Collins muttered, arms crossed as he observed from a distance. He won't even take food from anyone. Maybe he just needs more time, Ramirez said, keeping his voice calm. Logan was everything to him. Collins exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Time or not, a canine that won't listen is a liability. We can't keep sending officers to try and bond with him when he won't budge. Titan's ears twitched at the conversation, but he didn't react otherwise. The voices were background noise, meaningless compared to the ache sitting heavy in his chest. The first time they had tried reassigning him, he had sat in silence, ignoring every command. The second time, he had barked and pulled against the leash when an officer had attempted to lead him away. By the third attempt, Titan had begun to resist, baring his teeth, snapping if anyone got too close. It wasn't aggression. It was something deeper, something harder to fix. At night, when the station quieted, he would slip out. No matter how secure the kennel, no matter the barriers put in place, Titan found a way. And every time, officers would find him at the cemetery, lying by Logan's grave, his body pressed against the earth as if waiting for his partner to return. We can't keep doing this, Collins said after the latest escape. If he won't listen, we have to consider our options. Ramirez stiffened. What options? A heavy silence followed. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The unspoken words settled like a weight in the air. We retire him, Collins said finally, though his tone held something hesitant, uncertain. But, you mean put him down? Ramirez's voice was sharp now, edged with something dangerously close to anger. He's unstable, Collins argued, refusing commands, snapping at officers, running off. What do you suggest we do? Let him waste away by Logan's grave. Ramirez clenched his jaw, but before he could answer, Titan let out a short, sharp bark. Every head turned toward him. His ears were back, his eyes locked onto Collins with something cold and unreadable. He understood. He always understood. Collins sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. We give him one last chance. If he still won't cooperate, we have to make a decision. The words sent a fresh wave of unease through the room. Titan had once been the department's best canine. Now, he was an unpredictable shadow of himself. As officers left for the night, Titan remained where he was, unmoving. The station dimmed, voices fading, doors locking. And just as the world around him settled into quiet, Titan stood, muscles tight with purpose. By the time the morning shift arrived, the kennel was empty. Again, Owen Mitchell hadn't spoken much since the funeral. He barely touched his food, barely looked at anyone. His mother tried to reach him, but every attempt met the same response: a shrug, a nod, or silence. It wasn't fair. None of it was. His dad had promised to be there. He had said he would always come home. But now he was gone, just like that, and the world kept moving as if nothing had happened. The officers at the station still went to work. His teachers still gave out homework. Even the sun had the nerve to keep rising every morning. Owen sat on his bed, staring at the wall. His dad's badge rested on his nightstand, the edges worn from where he had run his fingers over it too many times. The longer he looked at it, the angrier he felt. The police badge hadn't saved his dad. Neither had his bulletproof vest. And Titan hadn't either. The thought made his stomach twist. Titan had always been more than just a police dog. He had been part of their family. His dad had loved that dog, trusted him. And what had Titan done in return? He had let his dad die. Owen clenched his fists, blinking hard as heat burned behind his eyes. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. The cemetery was quiet when he got there. Owen wasn't sure why he had come. He had told himself he didn't want to visit, that he wouldn't stand in front of a cold headstone pretending his dad could hear him. But his feet had carried him there anyway. He stopped when he saw the familiar shape lying in the dirt. Titan. The dog barely lifted his head, his body thin, ribs visible beneath his dark fur. His ears twitched to the sound of footsteps, but he didn't move otherwise. He just lay there, as still as the headstone beside him. Owen's fingers curled into the straps of his backpack. He had packed food, even though he didn't know why. Maybe because his mother had noticed the stories, how Titan refused to eat, how he kept escaping from the station, how no one could get through to him. "You shouldn't be here," Owen muttered. His voice felt rough, like he hadn't used it in days. Titan didn't react. His brown eyes, once sharp and full of life, looked dull now. Owen knelt, pulling out a sandwich from his bag. He set it down in front of Titan and opened a bottle of water, placing it beside him. "Eat something." Titan didn't even sniff at the food. He rested his head back on his paws, gaze fixed on the gravestone. Owen's chest tightened. He wanted to yell at the dog, to blame him, to tell him it was his fault. But looking at him now, so empty, so broken, Owen realized something. Titan wasn't the reason his dad had died. Titan had lost someone too. Owen swallowed against the lump in his throat. He wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But he didn't leave, either. Instead, he sat down beside Titan, pulling his knees to his chest. The evening air grew colder, but neither of them moved. They just sat there, together in silence, both waiting for someone who would never come back. Owen returned to the cemetery the next day. He never said much, just sat near Titan, sometimes with his arms wrapped around his knees, other times with his hands digging into the grass. The air smelled like damp earth, and the wind carried the faintest scent of pine from the trees lining the edge of the graveyard. He didn't know why he kept coming back. He just knew it felt wrong to leave Titan alone. Titan never left either. He barely moved, just lay beside the headstone like a statue carved from grief. His dark fur was matted, his ribs sharper beneath his skin than they should have been. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just existed, waiting for something that wasn't coming back. Owen tried talking a few times, mostly about nothing. He'd mentioned school, or how his mom kept asking if he was okay. Titan never responded, but he didn't run away either. That was something. One afternoon, as the sky burned orange with the setting sun, Owen sat cross-legged in the grass, picking at the edges of a peanut butter sandwich he had packed, but didn't want. He stared at the stone in front of him, tracing the letters with his eyes. Logan Mitchell, loving father, devoted officer. A lump formed in Owen's throat, heavy and hard to swallow. He clenched his fists, staring at the name like he could force it to mean something different. "This isn't how it was supposed to be," he mumbled. Titan didn't react. Owen dropped his sandwich beside him, feeling his face heat up, his pulse hammering in his ears. "You lied to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers dug into grass, yanking it out by the roots. "You said you'd always come home." His shoulders shook. The world blurred. He wiped at his face, angry at himself, at his father, at everything. "I miss you," he choked out. "I miss you so much." The wind stirred the leaves around them. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant sound of cars passing on the highway. Owen pressed his palms into his eyes, trying to stop the tears, but it was useless. Then, something warm touched his knee. He lowered his hands. Titan had shifted, his large head resting on Owen's lap. His deep brown eyes looked up at him. Not blank, not lifeless, but full of something Owen hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. Owen's fingers hesitated, then slowly ran through Titan's fur. The dog didn't move away. Instead, he pressed closer, letting out a breath as if he had been holding it in for weeks. For the first time since the funeral, Owen didn't feel completely alone. Officer Brooks leaned against his patrol car, watching from a distance. He had been coming by the cemetery after hearing the reports. How Titan kept escaping, how nothing could reach him. He had expected to find a dog too far gone to save. But now, seeing Titan with Owen, something shifted. He pulled out his phone and dialed the station. "I need to talk to the captain," he said. "I have an idea." Owen didn't know what to think when Officer Brooks showed up at the house the next evening. His mother, Emily, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression wary. "I don't understand," she said. "You want us to take him in?" "Just for now," Brooks said. "Titan's not fit for duty, but putting him down isn't the answer either. He needs a place to heal. And from what I've seen, Owen might be the only one who can reach him." Owen's heart pounded. He looked past Brooks to the car, where Titan sat in the back seat, ears down, eyes cautious. Emily hesitated. "I don't know if we're ready for this." Brooks lowered his voice. "Neither of them is. But maybe that's why it makes sense." Owen swallowed hard. "Please, Mom." She looked at him, her face softening just enough to show the worry behind her eyes. Then, Finally, she stepped aside. "All right," she said, "but this is temporary." Brooks nodded and opened the car door. Titan hesitated before stepping out, his paws landing lightly on the pavement. He didn't bolt. He didn't resist. He just stood there, watching Owen. Owen knelt down, hand outstretched. "Come on, boy." For the first time in weeks, Titan listened. Later at night, the house was quiet, too quiet. Owen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. His mother had gone to bed an hour ago, and Titan lay curled up in the corner, his breathing steady but his body still tense, as if he were never fully at rest. Owen sighed and rolled onto his side. Sleep never came easy anymore. He closed his eyes, trying to will his mind into silence. Then he heard it, a soft thump from downstairs. His stomach clenched. Maybe it was nothing. The wind? The old pipes? He held his breath, waiting. Another sound. This time, a rustling, then the faintest creak of the back door. Someone was inside the house. Owen shot up in bed, heart pounding in his chest. He turned to Titan, who had lifted his head, ears pulled back, body rigid. For the first time since his father's death, there was something sharp in the dog's eyes. Awareness. Instinct. Owen slid off the bed as quietly as he could, his fingers reaching for the police badge on his nightstand. He clutched it tightly, his father's name cool against his palm. The hallway outside his room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Then came a voice. Low. Harsh. "Check upstairs." Owen's chest tightened. He dropped to the floor, scrambling under the bed, pressing himself against the hardwood. His breaths came shallow, his fingers gripping the badge, so hard it left an imprint in his skin. Heavy footsteps crept up the stairs. The wooden boards groaned under the weight. A shadow moved past the gap beneath the door, stretching long across the floor. The door handle turned. Owen held his breath. A man stepped inside. He wore dark clothing, his face covered by a ski mask. His gaze swept over the room before landing on Titan, who remained in the corner, still as stone. "Stupid mutt," the man muttered. Titan didn't move, didn't even blink. Then a scream came from down the hall. His mother. Owen flinched, every muscle locking up as the man spun on his heel and rushed out. Owen slid out from under the bed, heart hammering. His legs felt like they barely belonged to him as he stumbled to the doorway. Down the hall, he could see his mother in the dim light of the living room, her arms pulled behind her back by a second intruder. A third man loomed over her, pointing something at her. A gun. Owen's breath hitched. The world tilted. He wanted to run, wanted to help, but his feet wouldn't move. "Where's the money?" one of the men growled. "We know the department sent something after your husband died." "I don't." His mother's voice broke. "Please, we don't have." The man raised the gun higher. Owen felt sick. And then, Titan moved. The dog lunged from the hallway like a force unleashed. A blur of muscle and fur. A snarl ripped through the silence, deep and raw. The man holding the gun barely had time to turn before Titan slammed into him, jaws locking onto his arm. The weapon clattered to the ground as the man howled in pain. The room exploded into chaos. The second intruder let go of Owen's mother, reaching for something at his waist, but Titan was faster. He turned on the second man with terrifying speed, his teeth flashing as he clamped onto the attacker's leg. The man fell back, slamming against the coffee table, sending a lamp crashing to the floor. The third man bolted for the door, panic in his eyes. But the sound of sirens outside made him freeze. Red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. The police. Titan didn't let go until officers stormed inside, their voices barking orders. In seconds, the intruders were on the ground, wrists bound in cuffs, their shouts drowned out by the crackling of police radios. Owen's mother sagged against the wall, her breath coming in quick bursts. Owen ran to her, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist. She held him just as tightly, pressing a hand against his head. Titan stood in the center of the room, his chest rising and falling, his fur bristling. His eyes locked onto the intruders as if daring them to move. For the first time in months, he looked like a police dog again. Owen woke up the next morning with something warm pressed against him. He blinked, adjusting to the soft morning light filtering through his window. Titan lay beside him. The dog had never willingly stayed inside the house since Logan died. He always slept by the door or in the yard, keeping his distance. But now he was here, right beside Owen. Owen slowly reached out, running his fingers through Titan's fur. The dog lifted his head, his deep brown eyes meeting Owen's. Not empty, not lost. Home. Owen swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Later that day, Officer Brooks arrived at the house. "Titan's a hero," he said, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The department's officially retiring him. That means he needs a permanent home." Owen didn't hesitate. "He already has one." Brooks nodded. "I thought you might say that." He handed over the adoption papers. "He's yours." Owen glanced at his mother. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly, but the smile on her face said everything. Titan was staying. The cemetery looked different today. Not as heavy, not as cold. Owen stood beside his father's grave, Titan at his side. The wind stirred the grass, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Owen knelt, placing a hand on the headstone. "We're going to be okay, Dad." Titan sat beside him, pressing his body close, his warmth steady and strong. Owen closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then he stood, and together, they walked away, not leaving the past behind, but carrying it forward, step by step.